Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're getting into some really challenging territory.
We certainly are.
We're looking at an intense article by Larken Rose. It's titled, When is it Moral to Resist? And just to be clear up front, this isn't about us agreeing or disagreeing, but really trying to unpack the ideas he puts forward.
Exactly. It's about understanding the argument itself.
Our mission today is basically to explore Rose's core message about authority, morality, and, well, resistance.
Yeah.
We want to help you navigate these, frankly, pretty uncomfortable concepts he raises.
Yeah, it's definitely thought-provoking stuff. It pushes boundaries.
It really does. So, okay, let's get into it. Let's unpack that.
All right. So Rose's central thesis, if you boil it down, is that most people are sort of psychologically blocked.
Blocked from what?
Blocked from even asking a fundamental question. When is it morally okay or even necessary to use force against someone acting for the state?
He thinks people just can't bring themselves to ask it.
He argues they can't or won't. And he doesn't think it's accidental. He calls it a societal conditioning, almost like a kind of mind control, in his words.
Wow, okay. Mind control, that's strong language.
It is. He claims this conditioning pushes two main ideas deep down. First, this equation. Authority equals morality. Whatever the state says goes and is therefore right.
So, questioning the morality of an official act becomes difficult.
Extremely difficult. And the second idea is related. That badges and uniforms give people superhuman moral rights, like they operate on a different moral plane than the rest of us.
And he sees this coming from everywhere. Education, media.
Pretty much. School, news, government itself. It's subtly reinforced constantly from a young age, according to him.
Okay. That ties directly into one of his first big themes, which he calls authoritarian hypocrisy.
Right. This is where he points out how people across the political spectrum are often quick to condemn certain government actions.
Like what? Give us some examples he uses.
Oh, things like, warrantless searches, mass surveillance, maybe prosecuting victimless crimes, police brutality. Stuff people generally agree is bad.
Okay, yeah. People get outraged about those things.
They do. They'll say it's wrong, it's immoral, maybe even criminal.
But there's a but coming, I feel.
There is. The hypocrisy Rose highlights is that people almost always stop right there. They condemn the act, but they don't follow through to the logical next step.
Which is?
Which is asking, okay, if this action is truly immoral, if it is a violation, what is the moral recourse for the person facing it? What can they do?
Ah, so the right to self-defense or resistance against that specific act.
Precisely. He draws this really stark comparison. He says, look, if a random person, a non-government intruder, breaks into your home, society generally accepts you have the right to defend yourself, even lethally.
That's pretty widely accepted, yeah.
Yeah.
Castle Doctrine and self-defense laws.
Right. But then, Rose says, suggest applying the same moral logic if the person breaking in unjustly, doing the same harmful act, happens to be wearing a government uniform.
And people hesitate.
They hesitate, they recoil. And that hesitation, for Rose, is the core of the hypocrisy and the proof of the conditioning.
Which leads straight into his next major point, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That self-defense doesn't just, vanish because someone has a badge.
Exactly. He really pushes this. He uses that same analogy, the masked intruder versus the uniformed agent doing the exact same unjust thing, maybe illegally seizing property or posing an immediate threat without cause.
So the act itself is the focus, not the actor's uniform.
That's his argument. He says the hesitation we feel in the second case is purely down to propaganda, this kind of absurd double standard we've absorbed. The uniform seems to grant moral immunity it doesn't actually possess.
It forces you to ask, does the clothing change the morality of the action?
That's the question he wants you to grapple with. Does it negate your right to resist an immoral act being committed against you?
Okay. Now, how does he connect this to something like the Second Amendment in the U.S.?
Well, he looks at the historical context, the debates of the Founding Fathers that he references in the article. His interpretation is that the primary original intent was precisely as a check on government power.
Not just hunting or militias, but resisting the state itself.
That's his reading. That it was meant to ensure citizens had the means to, if absolutely necessary, forcibly resist government agents who became tyrannical.
That's a perspective you don't always hear emphasized.
It's definitely a specific interpretation. And he uses it to criticize, for instance, some conservative viewpoints that strongly support the Second Amendment, but also seem to give unconditional support to law enforcement actions, seeing that as a contradiction.
Because if the state agent acts immorally, the right to resist should still apply in his framework.
According to his logic, yes. Which brings us to probably the most challenging question he poses.
I think I know where this is going.
He asks it point blank in the article, when should you shoot a cop?
Right. Just hearing the question is jarring.
It is, and he knows it is. He asks it specifically to break through that conditioning he talked about.
And his answer is based on that same consistency principle.
Yes. His argument boils down to morality is morality. An immoral act that threatens your life or liberty doesn't suddenly become moral just because the person doing it wears a badge.
So, if a civilian doing X would justify lethal self-defense,
Then an agent of the state doing the exact same X also justifies it, morally speaking.
he gives a hypothetical, doesn't he?
He does. He says, imagine you physically catch an officer planting evidence on you, evidence you know will send you to prison unjustly for years. In that specific moment, he asks, is lethal resistance morally justified?
Not practically wise, perhaps, but morally justified.
Exactly. That's the absolutely crucial distinction he makes. He separates practicality, wisdom, safety, consequences from the underlying moral right.
So it might be incredibly dangerous or unwise to act.
Utterly suicidal, perhaps. But Rose insists that the moral justification to defend yourself against that specific catastrophic injustice still exists in that moment, regardless of the practical outcome.
That's separating the ethics from the survival instinct.
Precisely. It's a purely philosophical point about the locus of morality.
Okay, so how does he wrap all this together? What's his definition of freedom then?
For Rose, freedom isn't just, not being in obvious chains. It's not just the absence of oppression.
It's something more active.
Yes. It's the presence of the right, and crucially, the internal willingness and ability to resist oppression, especially state oppression.
And if you don't have that willingness,
Yeah.
if you can't even think about resisting,
Then in his view, you're not actually free. He uses stark terms again. He calls people in that state slaves who obey out of fear, even if that fear isn't conscious, even if it feels like respect or patriotism.
wow, okay, so thinking about all this definitely brings up some big philosophical questions.
Huge ones. Like, where does moral authority actually come from? Is it just whatever the law says? Or are there deeper principles that laws should reflect but might not?
And following from that, does just going along with something you know is unjust make you sort of complicit? Does your submission enable it?
That's a tough one. And then there's the historical angle he brings up.
The Declaration of Independence comparison.
Yeah. How can a nation founded on a document that explicitly justifies violent revolution against tyranny simultaneously find it almost unthinkable to even question the morality of resisting its own agents today? He sees a major disconnect there. It's a pointed observation.
It is.
So what's Rose's final message in the article? Is it a call to arms?
No, not in a literal sense. His final challenge is actually intellectual, maybe psychological. He challenges the reader simply to think about these things, to dare to consider these uncomfortable questions.
Just to be willing to engage with the ideas.
Yes, and to be willing to talk about them. He argues that if you find yourself completely psychologically blocked from even contemplating the circumstances under which resisting the state might be morally right,
Then you've already lost a key part of your freedom.
that's his position. That ability to rationally weigh the limits of obedience is, for him, the bare minimum for a free-thinking person.
Okay. So wrapping up this deep dive then, we've really walked through Larken Rose's arguments from this article. The conditioning, the hypocrisy, the self-defense point, the Second Amendment view, that very provocative question, and his definition of freedom.
Yeah, it covers a lot of ground, and it's definitely intense.
It is intense. And look, these are complex, maybe uncomfortable ideas for a lot of people listening, but engaging with challenging sources like this, really wrestling with the arguments, that's how you develop a robust, informed perspective on these big issues of power and rights.
Absolutely. It forces you to examine your own assumptions, your own gut reactions to authority.
So what does this all mean for you listening? Well, it means thinking about what freedom really means to you. What responsibility comes with it? Where does legitimate authority end and potential tyranny begin?
Big questions with no easy answer.
None at all. And maybe here's a final thought, building on Rose's idea. If he's right that the inability to even consider resistance limits your freedom, how might everyday acts fit in? Like questioning authority respectfully, demanding transparency, or just thinking critically about rules and orders, could those small acts contribute to maintaining your own intellectual independence?
That's an interesting connection.
And does thinking about these extreme, maybe unlikely hypotheticals actually change how you view your normal, everyday interactions with authority figures? Does it shift your perspective?
It certainly gives you a different lens to look through.
Definitely something to mull over.
For sure. Keep thinking about it.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.